Hello. We are the junior and senior classes from Mount Madonna School, and first of all, I'd like to say thank you for giving us the time to speak with you. It's a privilege. We have questions prepared, but if you have any opening statements, we would love to hear them.
Great. Well, I will just say a warm welcome to Washington, D.C. It's not only where I work, but I was born and raised here in the Washington metropolitan area. So it's a beautiful city, it's a livable city, it's an exciting and dynamic city. So thrilled that you all can visit it. I appreciate you all being here, and I think what your professor has done with this program is really amazing, because if I understand it correctly, you're trying to go beyond the issues and learn more about the individuals that work the issues and what drives them and their passions, and a little bit about their career track and some of the challenges and opportunities. And I really think those are all things that will serve you all in your future education as well as your professional careers. I am deeply passionate and committed to combating human trafficking, which we consider to be modern slavery. It's really a blessing and an honor to work on this issue. Our intern, Adrienne, is here. I think she'd like to work for us in the future, and hopefully it'll work out. We'd love to have her. And it's such a moving issue. Not only is it, I think, a leading human rights issue of our time, but it's a major transnational crime issue. And so the fact that I get to come together with really smart, brilliant, other dedicated people and actually get paid to do a job where we hope we're making a difference is important. I began with this office in 2001 when we just opened our doors. And I think we were 6 or 7 individuals at that time. Gosh, we're somewhere in the 70s now. So over the last 17, 18 years, the mission and the mandate has grown, and so has the office. So of all of us now in this office, I think 2 of us remain, and it's myself and another colleague. And I have had other job offers along the way, but frequently when I describe to young people what I do, and I sort of describe what I think is just an ideal job, I think, oh yeah, I have that job, so why would I leave? I think because I care so much about this issue, hopefully that will resonate and come through.
Hi, I'm Lillian. Can you talk about how you came to be involved with the issue of human trafficking? And was there a specific event or person that inspired you to become involved?
Sure. So I remember being younger and my mother asking me what I wanted to do. And I remember saying that I wanted to work on an international human rights issue that was impacting women and children, where I got to travel the world and meet interesting people and make a difference. And so I did my undergraduate at University of Richmond. I got a double major in political science and sociology. I went on to Georgetown, Master of Science in Foreign Service. I studied under Madeleine Albright. And at the time, if you can believe this, it was the former Soviet Union. So I was actually taking a class in the former Soviet Union in 1990, right before the USSR imploded. And of course, then Madeleine Albright would go on to be my future boss and the first female Secretary of State. So I had also done an internship with the State Department at our embassy in Kenya, in Nairobi, Kenya. And so when I was there, I was sort of asking, like, how do you break into the State Department? Like, how do I get into the State Department? At the time, I thought there was, like, the holy grail was either to work for UNICEF or to work for the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And as you know, it's tough to break into federal agencies in terms of securing a job. So I was applying for Presidential Management Internship Program, and I was applying for Catholic Relief Services and trying to build up language skills, trying to build up my resume. And ultimately, somebody told me about the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. It is the smallest and the oldest of the intel shops. And I secured an interview, and I went to this interview, and the gentleman said, you would be a perfect PMI. You should do the PMI program. That's the best way to break in, and that would be perfect for you. And I had this momentary pause of knowing that I had applied. I had not made it all the way through. I'd made it sort of to the final ranks, but I basically had not been selected. And so I said, well, sir, with all due respect, I did try that route. It didn't work out, and wait for it, the State Department made a tremendous mistake. I am absolutely the type of person you want. I am passionate, I am working hard, and I will give it everything I've got, and I would love the opportunity to have a chance to succeed. And he said, you know what, I think we did make a mistake, and go ahead and go down to Steve Halter's office in INREX and start processing your papers. So it took a really long time for me to get my security clearance. I was doing some other jobs in the meantime. Eventually it came through, and I began working in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. So I was the Intel research specialist. I was sort of always looking for that one issue that moved me. And I was working on some African countries. I was working on some terrorism and drug trafficking, and a position opened up in the Office of Terrorism, Narcotics, and Crime, also in INR. And so I was able to establish the first account on transnational organized crime, because at the time, it was the mid-90s. So the Soviet Union had sort of broken apart. And what was everybody worried about? They were worried about Russian, Eurasian organized crime. They were worried about the nexus with big business. They were worried about the nexus with politicians. Oh, that was 20 years ago. Mind you, jump into the future, we're worried about many of those things today, right? So I was working on transnational organized crime and combating it, and there was a time where I read an article it was July 1997 in Foreign Affairs magazine by former Ambassador Swanee Hunt, and it was the first time I heard the words trafficking in persons. Actually, it was trafficking in women, I think. And I was like, oh my God, I'm an intelligence analyst. I help the US government find out how best to combat drug trafficking and migrant smuggling and arms trafficking. What are we doing about trafficking in persons? Like people bought and sold, treated as commodities. And we really weren't doing much, right? Because this was the late 90s. So I set about pitching, writing a paper. It would be an analyst viewpoint. And then I saw that the CIA had a fellowship, the Intelligence Exceptional Analyst Program. And I pitched it to my boss. And he said, well, gosh, it wouldn't be very convenient for you to be out of the office for a year on a fellowship. So I just don't, good idea, but I don't think it's going to work out. And oh, by the way, isn't that a soft human rights women's issue? Like, we're working on big, important national security issues. Why would this matter? And so I said, all right, time out. I beg to differ. It's a transnational crime issue. It's a corruption issue. It's a migration issue. It's a health issue. It affects the relations between the countries of origin and the countries of destination. So therefore, it becomes a political and economic issue. I respect that it's not convenient for me to take a year off, but if it would be okay, if a year from now I still want to do it, can I come back to you and will you let me apply then? And so we made that deal. A year later, of course, I was still interested. He was good to his word. I did the program. I traveled a bit around the world and around the country researching trafficking in women and children. I wrote a paper, Trafficking in Women and Children to the United States, a contemporary manifestation of slavery and organized crime. I was working with Elise Nelson in the President's Interagency Council on Women. They were kind enough to give me some office space. We became dear friends at that time, and my paper that I produced ended up getting leaked to the New York Times, and then it was used in support, passage of a law, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and at the time all the advocacy groups were coming together and they were pushing to do more on this issue, and faith-based groups were coming together, and good people in the government wanted to do more. And so the law was passed. Our office was stood up, and I was asked to come over, to leave the Intel word, to come over and help stand up the TIP office and be the senior coordinator for the first TIP report. That was a very long-winded answer to your question, I'm sorry. But part of the reason I tell that story is because I think it's important to hear that I heard no a couple times, right? Like, no, we don't want you as, PMI. I didn't make it into Catholic Relief Services. I wasn't convenient for my boss to leave. But at each step of the game, I think it's important to say, okay, like, is there another route? Is there another angle? And I think I also told you that I thought, like, oh, DRL, UNICEF, those are the perfect jobs. But I really think now I wouldn't be as happy there as I am at my current job. So when you're thinking about your careers, try to think of the big areas that are important to you, like I care deeply about this part of the world, or I care deeply about this issue, or I love these, I love working with people, or I hate working with people. I just want to be consumed with books and computers. Don't limit yourself so much that you inadvertently close off other opportunities because you were too narrowly focused.
Hi, my name is Imogen. Not too long ago, human trafficking was not a subject that many people knew much about. Can you talk a bit about the evolution of the issue and what you think the next step is in combating it?
Sure. So you'll hear from some of the advocacy groups that human trafficking was always an issue, but that it really has only been over the past decade and a half where this issue has increasingly gained information. I should have brought it because if you saw the difference between our first TIP report, which was like this thin with no pictures and no like compelling stories or information about TIP heroes, and you see sort of the colorful book that it is and how thick it is. Over time, civil society, the private sector, faith-based groups, international organizations, the United Nations, and different governments have all begun to sort of learn more about it. And so what you've seen is in 2000, the US government passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So that was our law. On the international stage, there was something that we call the Palermo Protocol, which is the United Nations Trafficking in Persons protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking, especially women and children. And in the early years, there weren't that many signatories, but to date now, there is, I think, 172 countries. So it's taken a lot of pushing by the US government and advocacy groups and civil society. In the public fora, like in the beginning, I felt like I had read every story about human trafficking. I'd seen every documentary, I'd read every book, and now it's really hard to keep up with it. Increasingly, there are more storylines out there. It's getting out in the public forum. Literally over the course of the past 2 days, Adrian and I have probably canvassed 15 different documentaries and PSAs because right now we're creating a seminar for ambassadors on this issue, just exclusive on human trafficking. So we're trying to find the most compelling videos and stories. So over these last 18 years, you have an international instrument which now has 172 parties. You have a federal law that's been reauthorized 4 times and is bipartisan. You have multiple task forces across the United States on human trafficking. Every state now in the United States has a trafficking law. So definitely incrementally, there's been an expansion. You have the cabinet meets on this issue, and now we even publish the transcripts and the video. So when you're talking about an issue, 15 years is actually relatively short, I think, for all those things to happen, for it really to be elevated. And I think that over the course of the decade and a half, we've become more sophisticated in our understanding. Like, I think when we first entered into this, similar to so many in the public fora, we thought it was all about sex trafficking, it was all about kidnapping, it was all about young girls. And that does happen, but now we understand that migrants are highly vulnerable and can be trafficked in global supply chains, that coercive tactics like taking someone's passport and identity documents, charging recruitment fees, which leads to debt bondage, contract switching, our understanding of this issue and the complexities, I think, has really expanded. In terms of the future, I think you asked about the future. I think some of the areas now that are really expanding is technology. So we're really trying to enhance our understanding of technology, not only how technology is facilitating and contributing to the problem. Obviously, there's a lot of attention paid to young girls which are sold for sex online. But we're also paying attention to technology, how it can be part of the solution. So there's all of this amazing artificial intelligence and all of this cool data analytics, which can search online ads and look for those red flags that it's actually a minor being sold for sex. People are talking about Bitcoin. People are talking about blockchain. They want to know how blockchain can be used to enhance the security of online payments for migrants so that they're not totally reliant on their employers, that money can be released when the contract is done. So I think technology is a really exciting area because I think the area is endless. Another area that I think is pretty exciting is, I think in the beginning, it was really governments working on this issue, international organizations and NGOs, and now we have tons of people in the private sector that are working with us. So really big name international retailers are saying we want to make sure that human trafficking is not part of our global supply chain. So this expansion of stakeholders, and we like to call them modern day abolitionists, like people that want to join us, that's pretty exciting.
Hi, I'm Indigo. I was wondering, what can we do to combat some of the misconceptions about what falls under human trafficking and where it takes place?
So that is something that we're constantly working on. When Adrian and I were going through all these videos and these clips and these documentaries, it was hard because some were very compelling, but some were very sensationalistic. A woman chained to a bed, or like all the images of hands, and ropes and stuff. They're compelling and they're moving, but what we see a lot of human trafficking is what I was just describing when we're talking about trafficking related practices, where it's more subtle. The door is not locked, but yet somebody has said, I know that your grandmother has your daughter. I know what Mexican city or village they're in, and if you leave, I'm going to have my colleague in Mexico get your kid. So we are constantly trying to enhance understanding of the subtleties of trafficking. Sometimes we're gently working with colleagues and NGOs to say, maybe if you were to expand the images that you're using. The other thing that we want to be careful about is, we don't like to see images of minors or children and stuff. We want to be really careful about protecting the victims and their identities. And sometimes magazine shows, they just want to go for the most sensationalist parts of it and make the victim break down on television. And all of our good colleagues that work in NGOs, they don't want that at all. So they're very protective of the survivors.
Hi, I'm Samith, and a Harvard report on trafficking states, many women are convinced to strike a deal with traffickers whereby they incur debts in exchange for entry and transportation into countries where specific jobs await, but instead, upon arrival, they are forced into sex slavery to pay off debts. These employment scams are especially tempting to women who have no meaningful economic opportunity in their home countries. Can you speak about the link between economic insecurity and human trafficking, and what are some strategies in dealing with this?
So part of what we do is we work very closely with other U.S. government agencies. The United States Agency for International Development is one of them. So clearly, USAID is working on a lot of the socioeconomic factors, a lot of the push factors. So they're working on issues to sort of address and alleviate poverty, to enhance women's equality, access to microcredits, access to loans, access to education. We're working with some of the grassroots groups on the ground so that they can not only address some of the, again, sort of the push factors, but also so that they can raise awareness in a culturally responsive and sensitive way to sort of alert people to some of the scams and the fraud schemes where somebody might think that they're going for a job. We were talking about technology a moment ago, so we're also looking at ways that technology, and really this is your generation, you'll all be so good at it, like how can technology help job seekers determine whether or not that recruiter or that employer is what they say. There's increasingly like job seekers help Yelp sites where people can sort of, go online and say, no, which wasn't the case. So, and we have programs in this office as well where we're addressing prevention of trafficking.
I'm Gracie. In recent months, the Me Too movement has taken center stage, finally bringing to the public realm women's stories of harassment and assault. It seems that almost every woman I know has had some experience to share. I'm wondering if there is any intersectionality between this movement and your work.
So we definitely are looking at some of the push factors, assault, violence against women, inequities. So yes, but one of, I think, the more dynamic and exciting developments has been, we believe so strongly in inclusion of the survivor voice into the development of our anti-trafficking policies and programs. And so by law, a couple years ago, there was a creation of a U.S. Advisory Council, and it's comprised of trafficking survivors, both for labor and for sex. And so they've now put out 2 reports. There was 11 members. They served a 2-year term. And what they're doing with these reports is they're interviewing federal agencies, they're giving advice and guidance, they put out these reports, and then this makes its way to the cabinet level task force, which also put out a report to say these are some of the things we're doing. But I think, when we talk about Me Too and having your voice heard and the issues of concern, it's listening to people that have walked down this road before and listening closely to, what sorts of policies and programs can we implement so that we could hopefully prevent trafficking.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Lucas. In our research, we learned that one of the reasons that so few victims of trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, seek help is because of stigmatization.
Yeah.
What can be done to help victims feel more comfortable seeking help and sharing their stories?
So it's definitely going to vary from country to country. So there's definitely some countries where whether or not you were forced, coerced, or lured into sex trafficking doesn't matter. It's terribly shameful to have been part of that industry in any way. So there's definitely, I think, an urgency to working with groups on the ground that best understand what are the taboos, what are the sensitivities, because we also want to be careful that as the US government or as other Western governments, we don't sort of race in and say, oh, our programs are the best. If the program is not culturally sensitive and it's not handled in the right way, then potentially it's going to fall flat on its face. So I think a lot of that is understanding the environment and then trying to craft some messages around that environment. I mean, there's also some awareness campaigns where if nobody has a television, then a television campaign, or if nobody has a radio, then a radio campaign of here are the dangers isn't going to work. You know, that might be a situation where it's better to have skits. You know, people go out and do skits in the local villages. So you have to know your environment. I also think a lot of times it's getting the buy-in from local leaders, local religious leaders, where they can be progressive and sort of, you know, say, we're not going to judge these individuals, we're going to listen to their stories, and we're going to provide help.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. Through researching key legislation relating to human trafficking and the various reauthorization acts, it is apparent that anti-trafficking legislation is ever evolving. Can you explain to us how this process works? And how do you make sure that the legislative process is flexible and quick enough to stay in front of the issues?
So, thank you. As I mentioned, the TVPA has been reauthorized 4 times. And every state has an anti-trafficking law, and many states have safe harbor legislation to enhance protections for minor victims. I'm speaking more from the executive branch perspective and not the legislative branch. But what I've seen over the years is that advocacy groups or other stakeholders will identify loopholes. You know, this is a gap. And then they are, as all good Americans, you have the ability to go up on the Hill and talk to your congressman or person, you know, writing, pitching for closing various loopholes. So what we're doing is, you know, and we frequently are getting the mandates, you know, that come out of these reauthorizations. They'll add additional things to our TIP report. When we started, there was only 3 tiers. Now there's 4 tiers. You know, the Tier 2 watch list was added. We've been relatively lucky with our issue because it's so bipartisan, and that's a pleasure because, you know, everybody's sort of working together. And so, and you'll see it across the aisle too, right? You'll see Democrats and Republicans coming together to co-sponsor a bill. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Hello, I'm Phoebe. Did you have any mentors who helped or inspired you in your professional career?
Well, Madeleine Albright would be one of them. So she was not only my professor, and of course when she became Secretary of State, I went running to my files to see if I could find like all these A+ papers or something. I was going to frame one, and I found like, oh, you know, B+ or A- with some like, you know, thought, you know, could have been more succinct here, or, you know, but she definitely was one. I mean, honestly, I do 2 things. I think with my career. One, I take great inspiration in the trafficking heroes, which are profiled in our TIP report, and in the survivors. So anytime I'm fortunate enough to meet one of the trafficking heroes, and they typically come through Washington when our TIP report is released, and they do a program, they come and they meet with us, and they typically go to 1 or 2 other cities and meet with other grassroots groups. And so I try and just bend their ear a little bit and ask them questions about how they do what they do. And the survivors too, like, are so extraordinary. And so a lot of times I think when we're burning the midnight oil and working really long hours, like, you have to sort of pinch yourself because these survivors have gone through extraordinary circumstances and been able to stay strong. And then the other thing over the years is I've closely observed different leadership styles. So it's not necessarily one person, but I've studied like different bosses over the years. Like, wow, I love the way that boss really gave credit where credit was due. Like, you know, gave credit to the person whose project it was. Or, wow, I really do not like the way that person chewed somebody out in front of others. So I've sort of studied leadership styles in my vicinity. And I have taken, when I could, I've taken different people who I admired out to lunch or to coffee and just sort of bent their ear about their career arc and what they've done.
Hi, my name is Emily. In an earlier interview with Elias Moreno, she talked about the effects of dealing with so many challenging and violent issues, and I was just wondering, how do you remain hopeful when dealing with some of the worst aspects of human nature?
So I definitely feel that those that are on the ground, you know, in offices on the ground and working on a day-to-day with survivors, it's got to be extraordinarily difficult for them. I know that in my travels, when I've met survivors, it's been very emotional, and it doesn't take a lot to bring me to tears. But I also think that you're trying to keep in mind that at a policy macro level, that if you can work really hard and make some policies and push and advocate for other foreign governments to take measures, you can be more impactful to help the very people that you've spoken to. We have different contracts where different organizations are counseling us on trauma-informed care to make sure that in our programs and what we do, that there's a victim-centered approach, that we don't inadvertently say things that might re-victimize. But there's also support systems for those that work on this issue, even if it's not directly. I know that each year, the whole office, so there's a team that puts out the annual Trafficking in Persons report, but we all come together and we look at all the submissions for the trafficking heroes, and it's very motivational, but it's also very sad because some of these heroes have had horrible things happen to them. And we also look at all the pictures that go into the tip report, and then we vote and select the pictures because you're trying to get a cross-representation of the crime. You're trying to show men, women, children, transgender individuals for labor and for sex trafficking, adults and children. And I know that a lot of times the pictures, just the pictures alone, have been too much. And I just have to go into my own office and shut the door for a while. Some of the cases, when I was doing my research, it was very hard to read the cases. But then I sort of bring it back to trying to remind yourself that you're part of the solution. And to be an effective part of the solution, you have to focus on the mission at hand, which is combating modern slavery.
Oh, hi, I'm Ruby. I was wondering if you could talk about how you manage a successful work life while also balancing your family and personal life.
Yeah, so that is an important question and one I care about. So I was part-time for 14 years. I started out full-time, and it was when I had my son, who's now 16. When I had my son, I was the tip report senior coordinator, and I was coming home really late at night, and my 1-year-old had waited up for me and was, crawling across the bed to fall asleep on my lap. And the then ambassador, John Miller, would come to my house on the weekend so I wouldn't have to come into the office, so we could work on the tip report Sunday morning at my breakfast desk. He was very kind to do that. And I just thought at the time it just wasn't working for me. I couldn't be the professional and be the mother that I wanted to be. And so I went part-time, which was hard because everybody wants to, wouldn't everybody want to go part-time? But I was able to craft it in such a way that I could get all my work done. I was really careful on my off days. There was a lot of probably unpaid time where I just made myself always accessible. I'd be driving to Target and I'd be on the phone, just directing some work. I tried to work really hard so that my off days were Wednesday and Friday. And so on Tuesday night, I'd push everything out for clearance. It would be a 24-hour clearance cycle. So then when I came back Thursday, it'd be ready for me to move on it. So, and so I've just finally in September come back full time. But I think in this day and age for you all, here's the good news. The good news is there are many more family-friendly options. In this office, we telework 1 day a week. So I'm around in a home office. People are doing compressed schedules, right, where they're working, I forget what it is, 8 9-hour days, 1 8-hour day, and 1 day off. People are working more out of home offices. People are DVDing more into meetings. They're not taking all the trips. They will, rather than travel abroad, will DVD. You know, if it's with Australia, it's like crazy hours, but, you know, somebody's doing a DVD at 5 a.m. and somebody else is doing it at like 10:30 p.m., but that's okay. So there are more options. I do think when you're researching jobs, it's good to get a sense of the landscape and just to sort of figure out what type of environment it is. In my early years, I worked all the time, like around the clock, and that was really nice to get myself noticed, but not conducive to having a family, and quite frankly, looking back, not conducive to having a robust, fulfilled life as a 20-something, right? But I think the good news is there's more options to choose from, and if you can be really focused and really good and really deliverable driven when you're at the office, you know, and not waste time, then you can get your work done in a set amount of hours, and then try to. I don't think my generation's done this at all. When you're off, try and be off. Try not to be tethered to that BlackBerry. Try not to check every bloody time you hear a ding. And myself included, like, you know, we're just constantly back and forth on our phones for work and for personal.
Hi, I'm Noah. So we spend a lot of time in class reading about and discussing the different ways that citizens can participate in a democracy, ways that go beyond just voting. And now more than ever, it seems that our country needs active and engaged citizens. Can you talk a bit about what you think are the responsibilities of an engaged citizen?
I think everybody has to figure out what feels most comfortable for them. For some people, it's going to be prayer and prayer groups. And for other people, it's going to be marching. And for other people, it's going to be lobbying, writing, contacting their Congress persons. I think it also begins at home. This is not what you asked, but it gives me an opportunity to say it. Like, I also think it begins right here at this table, right now, trying to have an open heart and mind and listening to one another and being kind. I think that we can't distance ourselves from saying that that's not about being an active citizen and a participatory citizen, because I think right now we're all really tense and we all have very strong feelings, and it's just coming out of us in some ways that are productive, in some ways that are not so productive. And so I think part of it is being quiet and listening and really trying to listen to one another's views, and then trying to figure out for yourself what feels most comfortable. Like, what can I do sort of in my community level? What can I do locally? And for some people, I know 6 people running for office, like national office. It's exciting. I mean, I have to say, it is definitely this generation, which, I'm being really real, I was sort of worried about a few years ago, because it just seemed, and this is not my title, but you guys were getting the selfie generation and how many likes generation and all this stuff. And so there was a feeling of like, where are the heroes? Where are the people that are going to step up? Like, for our shortcomings as our generation, will there be more than a selfie generation? And you guys are blowing us away. Like, the advocacy over the last year and a half, and I'm not making a political statement here. It's, you see so many people of so many stripes and so many faces and across, it's bipartisan coming together on certain issues, and that's pretty exciting. So vote. Whatever way you vote, vote.
Hi, I'm Jordan. My question is, as someone who has left such a significant legacy on the fight against human trafficking, what impact do you hope to have on the next generation of people aspiring to become involved in human rights work?
Well, I'm not sure I've made an impact, but thank you for that. I believe super strongly that each and every one of us that wants to, as I tell my children all the time, so I have a 16-year-old son, Noah, and a 14-year-old daughter, Gabriella, Ellie, and I tell them all the time, like, just find an issue. Like, it doesn't have to be human trafficking. Just find something you care about. It doesn't have to be now, no pressure, but try and figure out what you're most passionate about, like what your purpose is. And then, as Elise Nelson likes to say, like, lead from where you are, right? Like, you don't have to wait to be called. You don't have to wait for some big opportunity. You can start right where you are at, there's so many examples of young people doing extraordinary things. We give a presidential award each year for extraordinary efforts to combat trafficking in persons. And I'm not sure how many years ago it was, maybe 2 years ago, there's a group called Students Opposing Slavery, SOS, and they got it. So young people got it. So I think when I look at human trafficking and I think about this heartbreaking issue, I also try and look at the glass half full. We have people in the private sector trying to figure out how they can make sure that there's not forced labor in their supply chains. We have people in the private sector that have code of conducts and ethics where they say, if you're one of our employees and you're on an employee dime and you go abroad, it's not okay to procure commercial sex because you're part of the demand. We have faith-based groups. This Pope has been very outspoken, but we have imams, we have rabbis, we have people that are also speaking out. We have civil society doing so many different things. We have responsible journalists that are doing good stories. We have celebrities that have spoken out. We have students that are writing papers on the issue. We have electronic interns. We have professors that are doing research. Really, we have sports personalities, that are saying, like, I can be the face of anti-demand. And so I really feel like everybody has a role to play. I think first it's digging deep and trying to determine what are those issues that you really care about, and then talking to everybody you know in that field about how they discovered that field, what they're doing, the challenges, the opportunities, and then just going for it.
So Amy, I know we're getting close. What I'd like to do, if we can, is give a little bit of feedback about what the students heard that struck them from what you said already. So you guys, what struck you? What touched you and illuminated things for you from what you've heard so far?
Hi, I'm Carl. I liked what you said about really taking a break when you take a break and not staying tethered to technology and all of that, because I've definitely felt in my life when I have the urge to look at my phone and I just resist it, I feel a lot better in 5 minutes. I just feel a lot more relaxed in a way, and I think that's important, an important thing for our generation to think about.
Thank you. And I think each day, if you blow it one day, each day is a new opportunity to try it again. I'll be better today.
I'm Cyrus, and I liked what you said about not to just wait for some big opportunity to happen and just, it starts now, just do what you're passionate about and all that stuff, because that's what we've been hearing from other people we've been interviewing as well. And I also liked, as well, bouncing off of what Carl said about, giving more attention, and I think that's a big problem with whatever the selfie generation, whatever you want to call it, but yeah, I think that's a big problem.
Give her an example of why that first part matters to you.
Well, I think,
in terms of your projects.
Oh, okay. Well, I have a strong passion for veterans, and so I've started like interviewing veterans primarily from World War II, and then I brought some veterans from World War II, Vietnam, Iraq, to our school to speak with the students, just to give them a perspective about sacrifices that are made and stuff. So that's why I feel like that's important, because, yeah.
And on that, my 14-year-old just did a major paper on veteran suicide. So I know that 20 veterans a day commit suicide, and it's just, I mean, it just defies the imagination that 20 veterans. So thank you for doing that.
I really like what you said when, in the beginning of the interview, when you said when you're trying to find a job, think about like areas of interest and not just specific, like when you were talking about your organization, the UNICEF, I need to go there, but there's so many other opportunities, and I think that's my issue. I like to pinpoint exactly what I want to do, and I'm very controlling. But that leaves out like a whole field of things to do that can lead you to amazing places. So I thought that was very nice to hear.
I liked what you said about the importance of listening in being an engaged citizen. I thought that was interesting.
I liked hearing about how, when talking about, dealing with these situations you have to hear with, that you just remind yourself you're part of the solution, and that's why you're doing this, and to stay on track. I think that's important.
I think it's just very obvious how passionate you are, and that's super inspiring to see. And I liked at the beginning when you talked about if you're hearing no, to keep moving forward and pushing past that. And I think it's inspiring for a lot of us to see that if you have something that you're passionate about and you continue to work on it, you'll end up loving what you do, because I know a lot of us, at least me, are very scared about kind of what our future is going to be and going off to college. And I think that's something pretty comforting to hear.
I think you will definitely be good at what you love, because what you love, you're going to seek to gain knowledge. You're going to seek to almost become an expert. You're going to read things. You're going to listen to things. You're just going to absorb it, and then you become an expert, and then people start coming to you and asking for your advice, or opportunities start coming your way.
When you were telling the story about you wanting to go for the year, on a year-long leave of absence, and then your boss saying, oh, there's much bigger problems to deal with. Yeah. And then you saying it's economic, it's health, it's so many different things. I didn't realize what a diverse issue it is, and then also I don't think many people do, so I appreciate hearing that. I appreciated hearing that.
Well, when you think about it, when you think about the migration crisis, when you think about conflict-ridden situations, these are all producing refugees that are going to be highly vulnerable. And so the issue, when I first started, I was thinking at one point like, ooh, am I just too narrowly focused, just human trafficking? But because of all the nexus to so many other things, it's really not narrow at all. And my time in this office, even though it seems long, I was the senior coordinator for the TIP report. I was acting deputy director at one point. I was acting senior coordinator for resources management and strategic planning. I've managed a cooperative agreement, which is a program, and I've been a senior advisor in the public engagement and intergovernmental affairs. So I've also, within this one job, been able to do different roles. So I stayed with the issue, I stayed with the job, but it's felt different. Because when I first started, I was working on combating commercial sexual exploitation of children and child sex tourism. But I've been doing so much more now with working with the private sector and technology and global supply chains and procurement, government procurement. So you really can expand even within an area that might seem more narrow. There is something that's nice in an ever-changing world to have a bit of an institutional memory. Probably the best part of my job is the relationships with the different stakeholders that I have developed over the years, because when we roll out our TIP report, or if we go to a conference overseas, it's like the movement comes together. People care so deeply, and so it's almost like we found all these like-minded souls in all these different areas. And so that's pretty exciting. And we're not afraid to criticize one another too, to just say like, we think you could do more, you know, when you're engaging government acts. And so I think one of the messages when we travel abroad and we're engaging foreign governments is, like, it's okay when people are constructively criticizing the U.S. because that's the only way you're going to get better. I think on a personal level, one of the lessons that I've learned that's probably been hardest is to not take constructive criticism so personally, but to try and learn and grow from it. You know, I think it's hard a lot of times, just as human beings, not to take things personally, but if you can sort of sit back and say, all right, okay, let me rethink this, how can I do it better?
So, last piece of this is, are you curious about what these guys are thinking in terms of, is there a question that you carry for this generation?
Oh gosh, there's so much. And of course, like, I would love to hear from each and every person what they care about and what their future plans hold. Sort of a big overarching question is, what are you all going to do with this week, right? So you've heard so many different people from different walks of life speak, and there's been a lot of threads that I'm sure you want to pull, but like, how are you going to use this week to affect change in your local community? Like, what's next for you guys?
Really good question. And I'm looking at a lot of deer in the headlights here. Okay, yeah, you got something to say, all right.
Well, this has really made me want to get involved more in my immediate community, and I live in Morgan Hill, and it's a smaller town in California. But I really want to try to go to more town hall meetings that we have there, participate in like the food shelters that we have, and it just really made me want to more than just read about it and tell people about it, really be part of the process of fixing it.
Similar to him, I really want to get involved in my government when I go to college, because where I am right now is in an unincorporated municipality, which means we don't have a city hall for me to get involved in. We sort of leech off of everything else around us. So I'm really excited to get involved in a new environment.
Let's take one more. I'm noticing we're getting some critical mass out in the hallway, so we have to protect her popularity here. Go ahead.
Well, politics is what I want to go into, and so I think this trip just kind of made that more exciting, and strangely, it made it seem kind of more, less foggy, the path to get there, less like, I don't know, it seems kind of more clear, and that kind of like helped me with that, so.
Politics can get a bad name, but if you think about it as truly listening to those that you hope to represent, hearing what are their problems, hearing what they hope to accomplish, and then trying to help them solve problems and make it better, that's not so scary. That's kind of cool.
So thank you so much. Now I understand why Elise was pointing positive in this direction, saying you've got to meet me. So thank you so much. I mean, really.
So
stunning.
thank you all. Thank you for coming to my city. I love California. It's like one of my favorite places.
Well, I hope if you ever get out there, you'll come visit us on our little mountaintop.
Okay.
So thank you very,
all right.
very much.
Thank you all.